Hello, everyone. I'm Therese Bottomly, editor of the Oregonian and OregonLive. This is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Today, I'm talking to Helen Jung, our opinion editor, and Laura Gunderson, our managing editor for news. The three of us, plus publisher John Maher, make up the Oregonian OregonLive's Editorial Board. Today, we'll talk about how the editorial pages differ from the news pages and what the editorial board is looking at in 2024. We'll also talk about what Helen looks for in choosing which opinion articles and letters to the editor, which are submitted by readers, that we will publish. Helen, Laura, welcome to Beat Check.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
So Helen, tell us a little bit about your background in journalism. You've covered a lot of topics as a news reporter before you joined the opinion side on the editorial board.
Sure. Let's see. Before joining the editorial board in 2014, I'd been a reporter for about 22 years for news organizations in Seattle, Anchorage, and then here at the Oregonian starting in 2004. Most of my reporting career has been in business news, and I covered beats including commercial fishing, technology, and the sports apparel industry. But I've also spent a number of years on breaking news, courts, and related areas. But then again in 2014, I joined the editorial board, which was then led by Eric Lukens.
Yeah, and I'm just remembering you were embedded in with the Oregon National Guard in Iraq.
That's
for
right.
A time as a reporter. I'd forgotten about that till just now. And Laura, you also have a deep background in Oregon news reporting, and formerly were the editorial page editor before you became managing editor for news.
Yes, I started in sports as a sports clerk, kind of collecting scores late on Friday nights when I was 20, and I just turned 50. So that's a long time at the Oregonian, and I joke that I've covered every beat and every geographic area that we cover. Journalism goes deep in my family. My grandparents were both journalists, and so was my great-grandfather at the Eastern Oregonian in Pendleton. So I have worked across beats at the Oregonian, and I served as the editorial board editor in 2016. Started working closely with Helen there, and then moved back over to the news side in 2018.
Yeah, so I think that's a good overview of like having a really broad and deep experience with issues important to Oregonians. So, Helen, you write the editorials primarily. Now that Laura's managing editor for news, and those capture the view of the editorial board. So pull back the curtain a little and tell our listeners, like, how does the process work?
Sure. And you mentioned this at the beginning, but I just want to emphasize again that the editorial board consists of the three of us plus John Maher, our president. So none of the other editors or reporters at the Oregonians are responsible for the stances we take in editorials. So if people are upset, yell at us, yell at me, don't yell at them. But basically what we do each week is we get together to discuss recent news or things that might be on the horizon, and usually kind of select a few issues that we think we might like to weigh in on. I then report them out some more just to kind of see where things are. That might trigger another round of discussions with the full board to better develop our position. And then after that, I write up a draft opinion reflecting kind of our consensus and send it back to you guys and John for input and editing. Generally, we focus, we focus almost exclusively on state and local issues. So we've written pieces that have pressed the Multnomah County Commission on providing funding for the city's camping sites. We've followed the implementation of Measure 110 and actually recently called for recriminalizing possession to help get people into treatment. And last year we wrote a lot about the teacher strike at PPS and how the district just didn't have the money to pay for what the union was seeking.
And Laura, the board, as Helen said, is independent of the newsroom. The newsroom doesn't see editorials until they're published, just like members of the public see them when they're published. They don't have any influence over the editorial board's positions. the positions are informed by independent research and reporting, but also, and maybe you could speak to this, Laura, also by our longstanding principles and prior positions that have been stated. Like, I guess an example would be like doing tax reform comprehensively rather than piece by piece, or, women's right to choose or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the broad principles and how, probably close watchers of the editorial board wouldn't be shocked and surprised by most of the editorials?
Yeah, I think one key thing that I talk about on this front is just the idea that we're thinking about all Oregonians. We obviously do a lot of kind of daily or week-to-week editorials that focus on the Portland area. But for instance, when we are looking at endorsements or thinking about statewide elections or initiatives, we are really thinking about how these issues affect the state. In this role, and we value it a great deal as an editorial board, we consider ourselves kind of at the table for some of these major decisions being made, and we're speaking to lawmakers in many cases. And that's why, we think it's important to have this independent research and to think about all the ways this will affect different people. Politically, I think that we evolve. We change through the years. Right now, I'd say we're pretty socially progressive and financially more, conservative or thoughtful about how various taxes, for instance, are going to affect Oregonians. You'll see us regularly ask voters to think hard about some proposals brought forward that do really good things, but also add to the burden on taxpayers in Oregon, many of whom are struggling already with the amount of taxes they're having to pay. So that's kind of one way that we think about the decisions that are being made and why we endorse in particular ways that we do. Helen, what am I not hitting on?
I think you pretty much covered it. I mean, I would totally agree that, clearly our exact positions and our priorities are going to shift with the membership of the board. I would also agree we are, socially liberal and fiscally conservative from a statewide perspective. Maybe not a Portland perspective, but certainly from a statewide perspective. And, so for instance, we believe in protecting abortion rights and also believe that the government should spend tax dollars in a fiscally sustainable fashion. I would say a few other things that we've been really, through the decades we've pushed for are the critical importance of a strong public education system, policies that help keep businesses running to support our economy. We've advocated for transportation and housing investments as critical parts of our of just maintaining our way of life and of sustaining Oregon. We've called for accountability just time and again in and outside of government. And actually, Therese, you do this a ton in your column, but push elected officials and public bodies to act with transparency.
Yeah, and I think that, it's January, we all take stock. And in that vein, we recently published an editorial kind of laying out the board's agenda. It was very transparent. This is what we are thinking about and care about in 2024. I think you described the state of Oregon as having the weary feel of a fixer-upper, which was a great line. And I'll link to that editorial in the episode notes. But, the other thing, I loved what you guys were saying about the careful stewardship of public dollars, the accountability. But, there's also something around staying in your lane, that the growth of government beyond, if you're for maybe Multnomah County, should you be doing preschool for all? Is that, a program where you're completely starting from scratch, or Metro in some cases? So I think the board's been a consistent voice for like sticking with areas of expertise where readers really can expect to see results and where there's accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think we do pretty routinely is when there's a solution being proposed, we ask, is this a problem that this entity should solve? Because that is really key to whether something is going to work. Does this entity, does this agency have the expertise, the organization, the people to actually achieve the desired outcome?
Yeah, and some of the areas you just mentioned that were noted in the agenda editorial, you also talked about housing, you talked about homeless encampments on the street, the unsanctioned camps, mental health and addiction being a key area the state is grappling with. You mentioned Measure 10 before, or Measure 110, sorry. K through 12 education, and also electing competence in our leadership. So when you lay those things out, I mean, what is the goal of an editorial? I mean, what sort of response is the board looking for?
I think ideally it's really just to provide another perspective in the debate from this group of people who love Oregon, care about its long-term success, and whose jobs require us to be deeply informed about various issues. And so, we're highlighting issues that we want both policymakers and the public to consider. And to kind of, and acknowledging that our voice is one of many who need to help inform this debate. But kind of like the idea with the agenda that we lay out each year is just to kind of highlight for, again, policymakers and the public that these are the key areas that we need to see real progress on. And these are also the ways that we're going to be evaluating leaders, evaluating progress, evaluating agencies and programs. And so it is both, a kind of meant to be a nudge to Oregonians as a whole, as well as to just kind of be upfront with what we believe is important and how we are going to be the lens through which we're going to be evaluating progress this year.
Laura, do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, in your dream world, like when or editorial lands, when it publishes, it's like, what is the hope?
Lawmakers act. What else? No, I do think that I couldn't agree more with Helen in terms of, we are in this group of people and reading the news every single day, far more than most people have the ability to do. It's our job to keep abreast of this, understand the background. And so I think it's the institutional knowledge that our editorial brings. I mean, think about the number of years that we all represent in terms of tracking what lawmakers do and don't do, what they say they'll do, they don't do. And that's what we bring to bear. And so I think it's just really important to have that functionality. And what I like about laying out our priorities at the beginning of the year is that I think it means that we hold ourselves accountable as well. We also usually at that time of year do a look back on what's changed and what hasn't. It forces us to say, like, here's what we held up as a priority last year, and here's where we've seen progress and where we haven't. So obviously, especially right now, it's very easy to find a lot of things wrong in Oregon and write about a lot of different things. But I think we really try to stay on track to really focus on those things that are priorities and that will change the most lives if they're addressed.
So 2024, a big year, big political year, lots of elections. The board makes endorsements. And, I think just to help people understand, we're not bookies. We're not setting odds. We're not like trying to pick winners. We want them to win, but we're picking the best candidate. We might endorse a measure, say that we know, we might object to a measure, say that we know voters probably will overwhelmingly support, but we may have issues with the way it's structured or the accountability measures. We may have a candidate that we really like and endorse, but perhaps does not have the campaign finance money behind that candidate, and we know they may not win. So talk a little bit about the endorsement process and what we're looking for there among in particular, the candidates.
So the endorsement process is usually driven by, or I should back up. It's going to vary depending on the kind of race it is, but typically if there are multiple candidates for a position, we'll send out a questionnaire, and based on responses to those questionnaires, we'll whittle that down to just a handful of people that we want to interview in person, all at the same time. And that is that's meant to kind of make the most of the time that we have with so many different races. I mean, especially this coming November, where we've got 12 city council races, a mayor, an auditor's race, as well as statewide offices, et cetera. We're really looking to see how we can provide the most benefit to our readers. But basically, what we do is we're looking for people who show that they have a record of accomplishing things, are show that they can be collaborative, that they can reach out across groups with whom, and work with groups with whom they may disagree on other very key issues, and that they're effective in getting things done. And that actually ties into kind of one of our agenda items for that we highlighted in our editorial at the beginning of the year, that the importance of electing competence. We see just, that Oregon has been kind of churning its wheels on making progress in a number of fronts. With the election of Governor Kotek, also on a county level, we're seeing from Julia Brim-Edwards, there seems to be more momentum than we've had before to actually make real progress as opposed to spinning our wheels. So, it really just kind of helps emphasize the need to that we have this opportunity. Oregonians have this opportunity to choose people with the experience, with the proven track record to make significant change.
Certainly, Oregonians are crying out for that. I mean, we hear from people who really just want to see progress made on some of these long-standing issues that we've been dealing with. So to go to the endorsement question again, the Oregonian Editorial Board stopped endorsing presidential candidates under a former publisher and then started up again. So why did the current board, feel it was important to make an endorsement in the presidential race?
It's one way that helps people understand where your compass is pointed. And certainly the presidential race is the single most important election for the country. I think the issue, there's always, a resource issue. In that there's just one editorial writer. But also there's a ton of places where you can get endorsements on national races. There are very few that will provide endorsements on Oregon, Portland, Multnomah County elections. And that's where we have the most expertise. In many, throughout the year, we meet with elected officials, we meet with nonprofit organizations, with individuals and others who are deeply invested in the top issues facing the state. And so we do have that kind of perspective that I think gives an endorsement on a local race far more, depth than, our weighing in on a presidential election. Interestingly, our local endorsements always get far more traffic than national, even, our local congressional representatives. So that kind of also tells you what readers value as well.
Yeah, Laura, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I know you were on the board during some of those conversations about where to spend, our limited resources most effectively to help readers make decisions.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Helen just said. And I think to further that public service aspect of what we do, we record most of our endorsement interviews. It's kind of changed how we do it, especially through the pandemic, but we try to post those too so that our readers can go back and see this really valuable information. We're asking tough questions. And when I say tough questions, I mean, I encourage people, if they haven't, to go back and watch these and then look for them in the next round of elections. I mean, I think that Helen is somebody who, when lawmakers know they're going to come before her, they hopefully do their homework, and they sometimes quake in their boots. I mean, it is a hard process to go through. It's usually an hour of discussion, and it's based on research that goes back throughout that lawmaker's time in office. So you just don't see that level of scrutiny many other places. And I think that is why we're a trusted source for that information. People might disagree with where we land on an issue or a politician, but I do think we add value for everybody, every political stripe, when we just kind of ask these questions that call people to account on their stances and their actions in office.
Fantastic. So, Helen, back to you briefly before we wrap up. What are you looking for when readers have opinions they want to share, or maybe policymakers want to get the word out? What are you looking for in the local op-eds, the commentaries that are submitted, and then also letters to the editor, which, we still get a lot of letters submitted from regular Oregonians who want to make their voice heard?
Yes, we do. I'll start with letters because that's probably easiest and seems to be what we get the most of. But letters are submissions of 250 words or less. Emphasis on less. It does not have to be 250 words. That where a reader just wants to share a point or two. Maybe they're responding to an editorial or an op-ed, or they want to add some context to a news story they read, or they're just really they want to share something about a national election. We don't have any kind of limits in terms of the topics that letter writers can write about. We do have limits in terms of space, and we it has to be a clear statement of opinion that is grounded in facts. So we fact check these as well. Op-eds are going to be a little bit longer, about 650, sometimes 700 words or so. And what they should seek to do is to advance an argument on an issue specific to Oregon or Portland or local communities. It should not be national or international in scope. And those also run the gamut. A lot of times we'll have there'll be op-eds that are responding, laying out a long argument in response to an editorial, for instance, directly refuting what we're arguing, because we do really believe that it is important to have a broad range of views and debate for really our civic health. I mean, the ability to disagree, to consider different points of view, consider the frame, the lenses through which someone is looking at something is really critically important if we want this state as a whole to succeed. And so with op-eds, we want arguments that are ideally well written and that haven't been published elsewhere. But that's all something that people, if they're interested in submitting something, they are welcome to contact me. My email is hjung, HJUNG, @Oregonian.com, and I'm happy to talk through any issue with you.
That's great to know. Also, there are guidelines on OregonLive.com. If you go to the opinion section on the menu, it tells you how to submit and what we're looking for. So thank you, Helen and Laura. That's fantastic insight into how the editorial board works and what its processes are. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. Tell a friend, help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time,